All right, welcome back. We are in Matthew chapter 7. Man, we are finally finishing up the Sermon on the Mount, which has been Matthew 5, 6, and 7. So let's start here. Matthew 7, verse 1. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. Man, if there is a verse that is more taken out of context than this one right here, I'm not sure that I know what it is, because I've heard this so many times. This is so common to hear all over the place, not even just in church, maybe more often outside of the church. You might see it on TV or in culture or Twitter or whatever. It's like, judge not, don't judge me. And it kind of gets used in that sense where, like, don't tell me what to do. Don't look at me. Mind your own business. You can't look at what I'm doing. Mind yourself, kind of a thing. And I don't think that's what Jesus is saying here. Jesus is we're going to see. Jesus is clearly not saying, like, never look at somebody else and kind of like discern what they're doing, whether it's, maybe, good or bad. If he meant that, he did a terrible job following that, because in the last chapter, he's talking about the Pharisees and he's all about looking at what they're doing and discerning that they're kind of full of it, right? They're out there, praying in front of people, and it's like they look like they're praying to God, but they're actually praying for the recognition of men to be like, oh, that guy's so spiritual. That's my guy right there. So spiritual. That's my pastor. That's my rabbi, kind of a thing. And Jesus is like calling them out on it, and he does it often. And in fact, in just a few verses from now, Jesus is going to start talking about, looking at people to see whether they bear good fruit or bad fruit, because, you can judge a tree by its fruit. Clearly, verse 1 here is not really about like never looking at other people and discerning. It's more about judging, and I want to focus on this in just a second here, because that judging is a strong word. So verse 2, for in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that's in your brother's eye? In the Greek, it's kind of like a splinter, I think is my favorite translation. Why do you look at the splinter that's in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log or the plank or the beam that is in your own eye? So the idea is that they're made of the same thing, right? They're kind of both made of wood. One is really little, one is gigantic, right? And the one that's gigantic happens to be in your eye. Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck or splinter out of your eye, and look, the log, it's in your own eye. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. It's about hypocrisy, right? It's about the idea of like, how dare you think that you, blind as a bat, because this gigantic log, beams, whatever that it is, plank, is in your eye. There's no way that you can see clearly to take a little tiny speck or splinter out of your brother's eye. There's no way that you can possibly do it. You are essentially blind. And this is a theme that's brought up actually multiple times. The idea of like the eyes are brought up multiple times in this Sermon on the Mount. First in chapter 5, it's like you've heard eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. And then also in chapter 5, it's talking about, if your right eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out and toss it from you. Chapter 6 is talking about how the eye is the lamp of the body. If your whole eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And now here we've got in chapter 7, we have this idea here of having a plank in our eye and not being able to see clearly. So the eye comes up, and clear vision comes up many times with Jesus in this Sermon on the Mount. And I think when we start to put it all together, we start to see, not only does the eye come up and the idea of vision and seeing clearly and kind of discerning clearly, but we also see another theme that's commonly brought up in the Sermon on the Mount is the idea of action and consequence. Action and consequence, right? Wrong action equals kind of bad consequence, and right action equals good consequence. For example, again, with the Pharisees in chapter 6, it's like they were fasting, but they were like showing everybody that they're fasting by like showing it on their face and probably telling some people, and people are like, wow, that guy's been fasting for 5 days. How spiritual. And Jesus is like, nope. Like, that is an action that has a, consequence. And the consequence is that your reward is basically the recognition of a bunch of people who don't mean anything, right? Whereas if you fast unto the Father in secret, like your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And that is the great consequence for doing like action properly. So vision, seeing which one is the way that we should go, which way is the way of the kingdom of heaven versus which way is the way we should not go, which is like the way of the world, which is should be as far away from us as we can get it, right? So Jesus is teaching us vision and understanding, right? Understanding, the ability to choose between the two and see we want the kingdom of God in our lives. We want to be subject to the King of heaven and do everything that he asks us to be doing. So I think the idea of, do not judge and you will not be judged here, or judge not lest you be judged yourself. I think the idea here is really getting at something that we Christians have been, to be blunt, we've been absolutely terrible at over the years. The idea of the hypocrisy, like having that log in our eye while we're like trying to take the speck out of somebody else's, the splinter out of somebody else's. It just reminds me so much of just so many things. It's like people do this on a daily. I do this myself. I catch myself doing this probably on a daily basis. And you can take it on like the macro level, on big hot button issues like with the church, and be like, for example, we do this all the time with stuff like sexual sin, right? It's like adultery or like homosexuality or something. It's like, oh my gosh, did you see so-and-so and they're doing this, or they're doing that premarital sex? Oh, and we're like looking down our nose and judging them. And it's like, I can't believe that they're doing that. And like, oh, did you see so-and-so doing that? It's disgusting. Like how what kind of person is that? Like what kind? And then next thing you know, it's like, yeah, but I was looking at pornography, and I was completely addicted to it for the last 20 years, right? Or like, I judge those people for doing that, but yet I am that like man that like women feel uncomfortable around because I'm like leering at them and like disgusting, like just like you can just see it like in my heart. I'm just like, yeah, like the idea of having that judgmental thing up against somebody else when we do the same thing ourselves, right? When we do the same thing ourselves, it could be something simple-ish like gossip, and it's like, do you see that woman over there? That woman, Jane or whatever. And she's just always, so gossipy. And like, I just can't stand her because she's always doing this and that and the other thing and always talking about people. Did you know that Jane is like this kind of person that does this kind of a thing? It's like judging her, but we're doing the same thing. Judging that person, but we're doing the same thing. Having that log in our eye, trying to get in people's faces and be like, if you would only just stop doing that thing, like that's, gross, and looking down on people. And meanwhile, we're doing very similar things in our own heart. It's very interesting, especially in a context in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus has already been like, hey, adultery, like you've heard this said about adultery, that, anybody that commits adultery with a woman, is up to no good, basically. But I tell you that anybody who has lusted after a woman in their heart has committed adultery, right? It's a very interesting, I guess, statement when you combine the two. And it's like, so-and-so is like this, but I'm also, in my heart, doing something very similar according to Jesus, right? So Jesus, I think the idea here is about that kind of hypocritical judgment, which is, I think, more common again than we really realize that it is. I think that verse 5 is kind of key when it says, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So it's not even, you can't even say like judge not from verse 1 means like don't ever like, go to somebody else and have something to say, about like trying to help them, because Jesus is straight up saying it. Take the log out of your eye, man, and then you can see to do that, right? So what is that log? That log is that hypocrisy where we, in that hypocrisy, are forgetting for a moment or not understanding that we are all sinners. So when we look down on somebody else and when we're so like judgmental about somebody else, like we are, the same. We're the same. When that Pharisee is standing next to the tax collector, and it's this parable of the tax collectors in the temple, and he's like beating his chest, and he's like, God, forgive me, a sinner, right? And the Pharisee standing next to him, and he's saying, God, thank you for not making me like this loser. That guy's a sinner. It's like we do that so naturally. We don't realize that we're all actually on the same level. I think that's what Jesus is getting us to here. why verse 6 here, as weird kind of and chunky as it seems on the surface, when we start to investigate a little bit, like, don't give what's holy to dogs, right? And don't throw your pearls before pigs, before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Now, I think that's a continuation of verses 1 to 5, because you have verse 1 clearly, don't judge, but then you get verse 6 clearly saying, like, hey, some people are kind of like dogs and some people are like pigs, and don't give what's holy to them. Don't give your pearls to them. So don't judge, but yeah, discern, right? Discern. So there comes a time, right? There comes a time when you have that hypocrisy removed from your eye, when you're able to see clearly, right? When that light has entered, that window is no longer blackened. The light now enters the room, enters your body. You're able to see and even maybe spread that light. Now, if your brother is able to be restored and you're able to do that, and again, in humility and in kindness and love, great. But if that person ends up being like a, I know it's not politically correct, but like a dog or a pig, which biblically to the Jews were unclean animals, right? They were unclean. So these are not like, cute little puppy dogs that like we have in our house, like lap dogs or something. They're not good boys. These are considered by the Jews to be, street dogs that carry like disease, and they're dirty and they're gross. They eat garbage, and like, they got sharp teeth, and they do all kinds of unclean things. Throughout the Bible, evil people are often referred to as dogs. Similar in the same sense with pigs. Pigs were completely unclean for Jews, right? So the idea here is that there are kinds of people that are sold out, either sold out evildoers, or they are just not interested at all in this kingdom of heaven thing. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, but it does mean that perhaps through discernment, kindness, wisdom, love, that through the light of the Spirit, that there comes a time when you discern that those people they're just not going to receive from you, and the danger is that they turn and tear you to pieces. Now, I know it's a little bit controversial, but let's think of it like this: like Jesus sends out his disciples, at one point sends them out into the surrounding towns. And he basically says, like, for anybody that receives you, awesome. Like, let your peace remain upon that house that you enter into. But anybody who doesn't receive you, go, leave the town and basically like, knock the dust off of your feet of the town that you were just in. Like shake the dust off against them as a testimony against them. Like, leave them, and you go on and like find somebody that's like worthy of like, your peace, wherever you're going. Paul was originally like, obviously he was a very powerful Jew, became a Christian, went and brought the gospel back to those Jews, and they were not having it, right? They were not having it at all. And Paul kept trying and trying. His heart was for them. He kept trying. And at one point in time, he was just like, look, they were persecuting him. They were, it was not going well. And Paul said, look, your blood's on your own head, right? I'm done with this. Like, I'm no longer going to go to you guys anymore. I'm shaking off the dust of my feet up against you, and I'm going to move on to the Gentiles, right? I've had enough. So the discernment, I think that verse 6 is getting at, is like, if they can be restored, if you can, in humility, like help them and help them to see the lights, get the whatever's in their eye, help them to see the light or whatever, great. But just be discerning that sometimes they are not going to be willing to see the light, and they are going to want to keep that speck or that, that splinter or even that log in their own eye. And there's nothing that you can do to be able to help that come off of them and help pull that out of them, because like a dog that returns to its vomit, right? As what Peter says in 2 Peter 2:22, I believe. 2 Peter 2:22, he talks about dogs returning to their own vomit, right? And then he talks about like a pig that is washed returns to wallow in its own filth, right? So it's this idea that there's people that do that. Like it'd be like a dog that's just not interested in the gospel, not interested in the pearls of the gospel, Matthew chapter 13, and just wants the vomit. And the pig that's just not interested in being clean, not interested in any of that stuff, just wants to return to wallow in its own kind of mud and mire and feces or whatever. I know, again, it's not politically correct, but this, I think, is what Jesus is getting at. Restore people if you can in love. Once you take the hypocrisy out of your own eye and you have learned the love for yourself, restore people in love and that brotherly love. And there might be a time when you got to kind of throw in the towel on people and say, look, like, God's going to have to sort you out, man. Like, I've tried, I've planted, I've watered. And if you're going to grow, you're going to grow. God's going to have to do it because I'm done. I can't. This is like a danger to me or whatever. Like, you know, an example of Paul with the Jews, or even Jesus sent out his disciples at one point in time. It's just like, enough's enough. They've heard, they've rejected, maybe try it again, and now they're turning violent. You know, you gotta know when to I guess cut your losses and just hand them over to the Lord. So that's it. We only got 6 verses in, but I think this is a pretty important little chunk here